Colorado Territory, May 1872. The church bell rang loud and clear over the dusty town of Halston Ridge, a sound meant to mark a beginning, but for Josephine Norrin, it struck like a warning. She stood just outside the white clapboard church, her gloved hands trembling as she held tight to her bouquet. The scent of lilacs and rosemary clung to her dress, but it could not hide the bitter taste rising in her throat. She had been raised on a cattle ranch outside Pueblo, knew the weight of silence, the way animals sensed a storm before it rolled in. And right now, every part of her body was screaming. Inside, the guests were seated. The preacher was waiting. Her father, stiff in a suit that did not fit, had already walked her down the aisle halfway before she paused. Something had felt wrong. Off. That was when she turned her head and saw him. Caleb Meyer, her groom, was not alone behind the altar. He was whispering to her cousin Maureen. Whispering and touching her waist like he had touched Josephine's only a day before when he had promised her forever. Maureen's lips were parted in a smile that was not innocent. And Caleb, he did not even look ashamed. Josephine dropped the bouquet. It hit the wooden floor with a dull thud, petals scattering like little pieces of her trust. Josie, her father, tried. No, her voice came out steady. I am not marrying that man. She turned and walked straight out the front doors into the sunlight that made everything too bright, too real. She stood there on the church steps, breath caught in her throat, chest rising fast. The heat was thick dust curling in the air. Her hands shook as she pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time. She needed air. She needed "You all right, miss?" The voice was low, steady. She turned to it. A man stood near the hitching post, his hat in his hands. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn boots and a dark vest that had seen a few years. Sunlight caught in the strands of his dark, blonde hair, and his eyes, blue, clear, and steady, held hers without flinching. She blinked, stunned by how calm he looked, like the world had not just cracked beneath her. He nodded toward the church. Saw what happened. I reckon that was not what you expected to walk into today. She looked down at herself. White dress, veil draped over one shoulder, dust on the hem now. No, it was not. He stepped closer, still giving her space. Name's Declan Hart. I was passing through, came in for a drink of water, did not mean to be standing here when all that happened. Josephine gave a short, bitter laugh. Well, you picked a fine day to visit Halston Ridge, Mr. Hart. Declan's fine, he said gently. She looked at him again. He did not seem like the type to talk more than needed, but there was something in his eyes, something steadying. I am Josephine, she said. Josephine Norrin. His gaze dropped to her left hand. You do not have to explain yourself, he said. You walked out, that tells me all I need. I thought I knew him, she said, quieter now. I thought he loved me. Declan's jaw tensed. Some men do not know the meaning of love. They stood in silence, the church behind her murmuring with confused guests and whispers. Josephine crossed her arms, hugging herself. I cannot go back in there, she said. Then do not. My father will be furious. But you will still be free. She looked at him. Why are you being kind to me? He shrugged, eyes on hers. Because I have seen what happens when good people get tied to the wrong ones. And you do not look like someone who deserves to be lied to. She laughed again, this time softer. You do not know me. Maybe not, he said. But I would like to. Her breath caught. She had not expected that. Not today. Not now. Behind them, the church doors creaked open. Her cousin Maureen's voice rang out, false sweetness wrapped in concern. Josie, where did you go? Josephine did not answer. She turned to Declan. Do you have a horse? I do. Take me somewhere, anywhere that is not here. He nodded once. Come on. He helped her up onto his chestnut mare without a second thought. She gathered her skirt as best she could, veil tucked into the back of her bodice. People were starting to come outside now, murmuring, watching. She did not care. He swung up behind her and clicked his tongue. The horse started off slow, then into a trot, then a gallop. Once they cleared the town, they rode for miles. Across dry land, past creeks and cottonwoods, the wind pulling loose strands from her pinned hair. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the prairie. Josephine did not speak, and neither did he. But his presence behind her felt like a shield. By the time they stopped near a bend in the river, the sky had turned soft with dusk. He helped her down. There was a small fire pit from someone's old camp. Declan built a fire with practiced hands. She sat on a flat rock, pulling off her ruined shoes. He handed her a tin cup filled with warm coffee from his saddlebag. "It is not much. It is enough." They sat quiet for a while, the crackle of fire the only sound. She watched the flames, her hands still shaking. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I will be," he nodded. "Good." She looked at him again. "Why are you really out here, Declan Hart?" He stared at the fire a moment. "Left Wyoming last fall, lost my brother to winter fever, was not much holding me there anymore." "I am sorry," he nodded once. "I was heading south, no real plan, just following the road. So we are both running." "Maybe," he said, "but seems to me like we are just starting over." She smiled faintly. "That sounds less sad." He looked at her then, really looked. "You are strong, Josephine." Her throat tightened. "I do not feel it. You walked away from a man who would have crushed you. That is strength." She blinked fast, trying to hold back the tears. But one slipped down her cheek. He reached out slow and brushed it away with his thumb. Their eyes met and something passed between them. Not heat. Not lust, just something real, something that felt like solid ground. She breathed in deep. "Thank you." He did not look away. "You are welcome." The fire crackled on. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight she was not alone. And that was the first time she believed she might be all right. By morning, the last of the embers had gone soft and gray, but the air held a quiet warmth. The river moved slow beside their camp, and a low mist curled off the surface, drifting over the grass like breath. Josephine stood barefoot on the bank, her dress hem lifted in one hand as she stepped into the water just far enough to feel it bite against her skin. It woke her more gently than fear had yesterday. Declan was sitting on a log not far off, sharpening a knife with steady pulls of stone on steel. He hadn't spoken much since dawn, giving her the space she hadn't asked for but needed. She could feel his eyes now and then, not watching, just making sure she stayed whole. "You always ride with coffee and flint in your saddlebag?" she asked without turning. He didn't answer right away. "The scraping stopped. Never know where I'll end up," he said. "Better to be ready than caught needing." She bent to rinse her hands, water darkening the fabric at her wrists. "I suppose that's the difference between wandering and running." "Is that what you were doing?" he asked. She straightened, wiping her hands on the skirt. "I don't know anymore. Thought I was walking toward a life, not out of one." Declan stood, sliding the knife back into its sheath. "You didn't lose anything worth keeping." Josephine turned then. "That may be true. But it still cut deep." He gave a short nod, as if he understood exactly what that meant, though he didn't offer sympathy. She was grateful for that. Pity was a thing too heavy to carry right now. They rode again after breaking what little camp there was. The mare carried them eastward, where the land stretched wider and the ridgeline softened into low hills. They passed a stand of cottonwoods, the wind lifting the leaves in a hush like distant applause. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and clean. Josephine leaned back slightly, her voice near his ear. "What do you plan to do in Colorado?" "Didn't have much of a plan," he said. "But there's a rancher outside Trinidad who needs hands, might ride down that way." She was quiet a while. "I've got land," she said finally. "North of Pueblo. My father gave it to me when I turned 21. The house is small, but the fences are good, enough pasture for 30 head if I'm careful. I was going to bring Caleb there after the wedding." Declan didn't speak. "I'm still going," she added. "With or without a ring?" "You shouldn't go alone," he said. Josephine looked over her shoulder. "You offering, if you'll have the help." She studied him a moment. "You know cattle?" "Well enough to keep them fed and breathing." A smile tugged at her mouth, the first real one she'd felt in days. "That'll do." They stopped in a small settlement by late afternoon. Just a dry goods store, a livery, and a clapboard inn with a faded green awning. Josephine slid down first, brushing the dust off her skirt. Her legs ached from riding, but she stood steady. Declan handed the reins to a boy at the livery. "She needs oats and a rub-down." Josephine walked beside him toward the inn. 1 room or 2, he didn't blink. You choose. 2, she said. Not because I don't trust you, but because I want to remember what it feels like to stand on my own, he nodded. Fair. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the scent of oil lamps and old wood. The woman behind the counter gave Josephine's dress a glance, but said nothing. They paid in cash, and Josephine climbed the narrow stairs with a key in her palm and her heart beating slow and strange in her room. She unpinned her hair and let it fall around her shoulders. She stood at the window, watching the street below. Declan sat on the porch rail, his back to the post, arms crossed as he watched the clouds roll in. She didn't know him, not really. But his presence eased something in her she hadn't known was clenched. He didn't try to fix her. Didn't fill the quiet with stories or praise. He just stayed. That night, over a plain supper of beans and cornbread, Josephine asked, "Did your brother have a name?" Declan looked up, eyes meeting hers across the table. "Elias, you were close," he nodded once. "He was older, quieter than me. Taught me how to shoot, track, patch up a saddle with thread and spit. Buried him last December near the base of Medicine Bow." Josephine swallowed. "That sort of loss doesn't leave." "No, but it makes room for other things." She set her fork down. "Like what?" He leaned back. "Like seeing someone who thought they were broken start putting themselves back together." Her breath caught. Not from his words, but the way he said them, like it was something sacred. She pushed her plate aside. "I'm not sure who I am without the life I planned. You'll find out. You've got land, will, and your own name." She folded her hands in her lap. "And you, I've got time, and no place better to be." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Josephine stood, walking to the door. "Come with me to the ranch," she said. Declan rose slowly. "You sure?" She looked back at him. "I don't want to build it alone." He held her gaze. "Then I'll ride with you." And just like that, something shifted, not fast, not loud, just solid, like 2 hands finding each other in the dark and holding on. The road south from Halston Ridge narrowed into rutted clay and tufts of buffalo grass, made slick in patches by last night's storm. The trail bent around low hills, where jackrabbits darted from underbrush and meadowlarks called out from fence posts. Josephine guided her gelding with practiced ease, her back straight in the saddle, eyes on the horizon. Declan rode just behind, his hat pulled low, the brim shadowing the sharp line of his jaw. They'd left the settlement near daybreak, traveling light. She wore a faded blouse and sturdy riding skirt now, the remnants of lace and silk long since folded away. The sky above ran broad and cloudless, and the air carried the scent of warming earth. "Your land," Declan said after a stretch of quiet. "How much of it's been worked?" Josephine slowed her horse. "The pastures were grazed through the fall. There's a creek that runs clear when the snow melts. My father helped me lay the fencing last spring, cedar posts, barbed wire from Kansas City. The barn's got a lean, but it's holding." He gave a short nod. "You thinking of taking in more cattle, if I can hire the right help? I've got 20 head boarding with a neighbor until I can bring them in. They'll have come June. Then you'll need hands before that." She glanced over. "You think I can't run it alone?" "I think you're smart enough not to try." Josephine's mouth curved slightly. "Well, you're not wrong." They passed a burned-out homestead by midday, half a chimney standing amid collapsed timbers, the grass overtaking what used to be a vegetable patch. Josephine slowed, studying the ruin as they rode past. "You ever wonder what makes a place die like that?" she asked. Declan's gaze lingered on the blackened stone. "Sometimes it's fire. Sometimes it's folks giving up." "I won't give up." "I know." They made camp beneath a bluff that evening where a shallow stream curved through cottonwoods and the ground softened into moss. Josephine set about gathering kindling while Declan unsaddled the horses, his movements quiet and deliberate. He didn't speak unless there was purpose behind it, and she'd come to understand the comfort in that. As she knelt beside the fire pit arranging tinder, he crouched beside her, striking the flint. "I've been thinking," she said, eyes on the curling smoke. "About what kind of place I want that ranch to be." He waited, letting her speak. I want it to be more than land with fences. I want it to be shelter, for anyone who's left something behind and needs a place to start again. Declan leaned back on his heels. You planning on turning it into a mission? No, but I won't turn away someone who's willing to work for their keep, not if they're honest, he nodded. That kind of place draws good people, and trouble. I can handle both, she said, meeting his gaze. I believe you. They ate by firelight salt pork and boiled potatoes wrapped in cloth. The sky above burned deep blue and the stars came on slow, like lanterns lit one by a careful hand. Josephine leaned back against her saddle, watching the flames. What about you? What kind of place are you looking for? I don't know if I ever was, Declan said. I moved from one patch of dirt to another for years. Never stayed long. Why not? He reached for a twig, rolling it between his fingers. Wasn't sure any of it would hold. Josephine turned her face toward him. And now, he looked at her then, not rushed, not uncertain. Now I'm thinking maybe I just hadn't found the right ground. A quiet settled between them, softer than silence. The kind that didn't need filling. Josephine's eyes didn't leave his face. If you stay, I won't ask you to be something you're not. I wouldn't follow you if I didn't mean to stay. Then we'll build it, together. He reached over, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His hand lingered longer than it needed to, calloused fingers warm against her skin. She didn't pull away. Above them, the wind moved through the trees in slow waves. The fire crackled low and the horses shifted in the grass. Josephine exhaled. I never thought I'd feel peace again. Declan's voice was low. It comes quiet. But it comes. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let her be there, folded into the stillness beside him, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of the world settle into something she could carry. They reached Josephine's land by mid-morning after 3 days of riding east and south, cutting across dry prairie and narrow streambeds, the peaks of the wet mountains rising like a promise in the distance. The trail grew familiar to her again, weathered fence posts, a lone cottonwood bent near the gate, the sound of her own breath tightening as the house came into view. The cabin stood just where she'd left it, low and square, with a stone chimney and a cedar porch that faced the eastern pasture. The shutters hung straight, though one had come loose at the bottom. The barn leaned a little harder, but it was still upright. A pair of mourning doves burst from the eaves as they approached, their wings clapping the still air. Josephine dismounted without a word, her boots touching home soil for the first time in weeks. The grass was taller than she remembered, and the door's latch stuck when she tried it, but the place still smelled of earth and pine and dry sun-baked wood. She stepped inside and stood still, blinking against the dim light. Declan didn't follow her in right away. He stayed outside, unsaddling the horses with quiet hands, tying them to the post near the trough. When he did enter, he left his hat by the door. You've got good bones here, he said, scanning the room. Stoves solid, roofs tight. Josephine brushed dust from the small table near the window. It's livable. I'd meant to whitewash the back room before things turned. He didn't ask. He only nodded once and offered, I'll help with the scrubbing. They worked without much talk. She opened the windows, beat out the linens, and swept the floor 3 times until the boards showed their grain again. Declan hauled buckets from the well, patched the porch rail, and took stock of the tools left in the shed, half rusted but usable with some care. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, they'd cleaned the hearth, smoked out a pair of nesting swallows from the rafters, and boiled beans over the stove. Josephine lit a lantern and set it on the sill, the glow catching in her hair as she leaned against the frame. Feels strange, she said, voice low, having someone else here. Declan didn't move from his place by the fire. You want me to sleep in the barn? No, she turned to face him. I meant it in a good way. He reached for his coffee tin, then paused. I don't want to make you uneasy. You don't. She stepped closer, letting the quiet hold. I just haven't had to share space with a man who doesn't take more than he gives. Declan's gaze held hers. I won't take unless you offer. She didn't look away. Then you'll be welcome here. The silence stretched, not awkward, just full. Outside, the crickets started up, and a breeze moved through the open window, stirring the lantern flame. Josephine crossed the room and opened a chest near the bed. She pulled out a folded quilt, worn soft at the edges, and handed it to him. "There's a cot in the back room, it's not much." "I've had worse," he said, accepting it. As he turned away, she hesitated. "Declan," he stopped. "I know what it's like to carry things you don't speak of. But if the day comes when you want to tell me about your brother or the places you've been, I'll listen." His jaw shifted, and for a moment he was still. Then he gave a small nod and disappeared into the back room, the door creaking shut behind him. Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, her hands in her lap, heart steady but full. The house no longer felt empty. It felt like the start of something planted deep, slow-growing and real. In the morning, they would begin repairs on the barn. After that, the fencing. She would send word to retrieve her cattle. There was work ahead, hard, honest work, but she wasn't afraid of it. Not with him here, not anymore. By early May, the ranch was waking into its own pulse again. The wind rolled low across the grass, bringing with it the scent of sun-warmed soil and the faint tang of iron from the creek. Josephine stood in the half-shadow of the barn, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching the last slat fall into place beneath Declan's hammer. He stepped back, squinting against the light, then leaned to test the weight of the repaired beam. It held. "Won't lean again," he said. Josephine brushed her palms on her skirt. "Let's hope the cattle appreciate craftsmanship. They'll appreciate feed and shelter. The rest's for us." She smiled, but it faded as she looked toward the open field beyond the fence line. "They're bringing the herd in this afternoon. Paul Travers said he'd ride with them from his north pasture." Declan's hands dropped to his belt. "You trust him?" "I do. He's got no reason to cheat me, and he's always dealt square." Her mouth tightened. "Still, I'll count every hoof myself." "You should." They worked through the noon hour without pause, hauling fresh hay into the loft and checking the water troughs. The sun hung high, but the breeze kept the heat from biting. By the time dust rose in the distance, Josephine had changed into her riding boots and tied her hair back tight. A dozen cattle came into view first, then more behind, their movements slow and deliberate. Paul rode at the front, two younger riders flanking him. Josephine noted the brand on each flank as they approached, eyes sharp, her ledger already open against her hip. Paul tipped his hat when he reached her. "Kept them in good shape." "You'll be pleased." "I'll be the judge of that," she said, though not unkindly. They counted 41 in total, including 6 calves and 1 stubborn bull that seemed to resent the entire process. Josephine inspected them with care, her hand brushing the coats, checking hooves, noting age and condition. Declan stood near the gate, watching her, not the cattle, not Paul, just her, the way she moved with certainty, the way her mouth pressed into thought. When the herd was penned and the riders gone, Josephine leaned against the fence, dust clinging to her boots, her ledger tucked under one arm. "They're better than I expected," she said. "You did well." She looked at him. "We did." That evening, after supper was cleared and the horses settled, she found him in the back field, seated on a stump near the ash tree. The sky was softening, light pulling long across the earth. She approached in silence, then sat beside him, careful not to speak too soon. "I got a letter today," she said finally, "from my father." Declan turned his head slightly. "He said the family's cut me loose. No inheritance, no name, nothing." He didn't interrupt. "I thought it would hurt more," she said, "but all I felt was relief. Like the last thing tying me to that church broke clean." Declan's voice was quiet. "You don't need their name." "No," she said. "I have this place, and I have the name I was born with." He watched her, the lines of his face softened by the dusk. "What do you want now, Josephine?" She drew her knees up, arms resting across them. "To fill these fields with life, to mend the roof before summer storms, to wake up each morning knowing the land is mine and no one else's. And I want," she hesitated, "I want to build it with someone who sees it the same way." He didn't speak right away. Then, "I've been thinking about staying, not just for now, for good." She turned to him. "I've never asked for much," he said, "never had much to offer. But I'd give all I've got to this place. To you." Her eyes didn't waver. "I don't need promises." "I'm not giving promises," he said. "I'm giving my word." He reached for her hand, fingers closing gently around hers, her breath caught not from surprise but from the certainty in the gesture. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her without hesitation. The crickets began to hum, and the air cooled, but neither moved. Later, in the quiet of the cabin, she lit the oil lamp and stood by the window while he finished tying down the shutters. When he came in, she turned to face him. "I want you here," she said. "Not just as a ranch hand, I want you beside me." Through all of it, Declan crossed the room in 2 quiet steps. "Then I'm yours." They didn't speak again. He took her hands and she let him. When he kissed her, it was slow and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't ask it answered. They built a life from there. Through the summer, the land flourished beneath their care. The calves fattened, the fences held. Josephine took on 3 ranch hands by July, 2 men and a widow with a sharp eye and quicker hands. They added a new stall to the barn and patched the roof before the rains came. Declan carved a porch bench in the evenings, his whittling knife moving with easy rhythm while she read aloud from the old books her mother had left behind. In August, they married beneath the ash tree, the same one where they'd first spoken of staying. Paul Travers stood as witness, and the widow made a lemon cake with flour and sugar Josephine had bartered for in town. No bells rang, no cousin sent word, and Josephine didn't wear white. She wore a pale blue dress stitched by her own hand, and Declan wore the same vest he'd arrived in. When he took her hand and called her his wife, it was not the start of something, it was the confirmation of all they'd already built. They slept in the same bed from then on, and no part of the house felt empty again. Years later, folks passing through the southern edge of Pueblo County would speak of a quiet ranch tucked into the hills, run by a couple who worked side by side without fuss. They said the woman could count a herd quicker than most men, and the man with the steady voice had once ridden all the way from Wyoming with nothing but a saddlebag and a heart full of ghosts. But those ghosts didn't linger, not there, not where love had taken root and held.